Welcome to MMA on the Rocks. My name is Bill Welker, and you are listening to episode 111 of the podcast, or you're joining us here on YouTube. Today is Sunday, October the 7th, and we are fresh off of what was allegedly the biggest fight in mixed martial arts history. Before we get into that or any of the other drama that went on this weekend, let me introduce my co-host all the way from mildly humid New Jersey, Jeff. Yeah, I'm Wilson. Jeff, late on a Sunday evening to do the podcast this time. You've been babysitting all day with the nieces and nephews. How you feeling this evening, my friend?
Exhausted, Bill. The kids, I love them, but I got to take them in small doses, Bill. I'm not ready to be a dad yet. And spending all day with three kids running around, I think I'm going to hold off a few years before I start having kids, Bill.
Smart man. If this shit was easy, child support wouldn't be a thing.
Yeah, Bill. So, Bill, let's get right into it, because last night featured the return of one of the greats in MMA, Gray Maynard. Bill, what happened?
He didn't look so good. Jeff, man, this was intense. This card was intense. I had to take my pants to talk about this card. I had to take off my pants. You know why? Because my balls was hot.
Oh, man.
This was an awesome card. It had, it was kind of like watching like skiing or something. Like, it had its ups and downs. It's like, okay, here's the fun part where you're going down the hill, and then there's the part where you're just like sitting on the chair taking you back up the hill. That's how I kind of felt watching this card. It got off to a great start. I mean, right off the bat, Tony Martin with an awesome head kick knockout of Ryan LaFleur. And, we're going to start from the bottom of this card and kind of bounce around, just because this is our show and we can do whatever the fuck we want. And then from there, Nick Lentz with an impressive performance over Gray Maynard, who, I don't know, man. Here's a guy who was an awesome prospect coming off The Ultimate Fighter. He had two epic wars with Frankie Edgar, and then just kind of like fell off for a while. He ran into a couple of people that just kind of like, he got knocked out a couple of times in a row, and then he got outpointed a couple of times, and then got some sporadic wins over people nobody had really heard of. But he hadn't fought in over a year. Gets back in there with Nick Lentz, who is Mr. Hot and Cold himself as well. But Nick Lentz looked awesome in his fight against Gray Maynard. So we'll start with this one since you brought it up. What were your thoughts on the Maynard and Lentz fight?
Yeah, dude. Nick Lentz looked phenomenal in there. I don't think Gray Maynard had any business being in there with him. He looked slow. His hands were not able to keep up with Nick Lentz at all. I was really surprised when they even announced that Gray Maynard was going to be on this card.
Yeah, it's always kind of weird when there's a guy you haven't thought about for a while, and then he just appears on the card. But at the same time, I'm like, oh, Gray Maynard. When I think of Gray Maynard, I think of those fights with Frankie Edgar, and then I'm game. But I think that Gray Maynard is a distant memory from what we saw last night. He took a beating from Nick Lentz, and this fight was on the early Fight Pass prelims, and it actually made it onto the FS1 prelims because there were so many finishes. The card was moving along so quickly. They had some dead air to fill, so they just threw this. Luckily for Nick Lentz, they were able to throw this fight into those TV prelims, which I'm sure a lot of people were watching because this was a big card. Was it the biggest event in UFC history? I sure fucking hope not after the way it ended. But good for the fighters who had awesome performances on this card and didn't make assholes out of themselves. So let's jump around a little bit. Let's go back up to the main card and let's start with what deservedly was the fight of the night and had an unfortunate ending. Not as unfortunate as the main event, but I'm talking about Tony Ferguson and Anthony Pettis. This was a fucking war. I had it scored 1 round apiece at the end of the second round. These guys were a bloody mess. You couldn't really tell who was bleeding. I think Pettis had a cut on his forehead, but I think Ferguson had a cut like inside his mouth, unless he was just drinking Pettis's blood. This was really awesome. Anthony Pettis had a hard time finding his rhythm in that first round, just because Tony Ferguson is a very unorthodox guy. He's in there, and it seemed like he was stumbling on that knee that he had injured, just 6 months ago. But at the same time, he still had like this weird rhythm. And, when a fighter doesn't have a real pattern to what they're doing, it's hard to pick up on their tendencies, and it's hard to get your own combinations going the way that you want them to. And that's what Pettis struggled with in the first round. And then in the second round, he somehow found a way to land some shots, and he got Tony Ferguson down on the ground, and there was blood everywhere. It splattered all over John Anik and, and Joe Rogan and Dominic Cruz in the commentator booth. Who knows who else got showered in blood, but this was awesome. This fight is what we love about this sport, is two guys willing to go out there and put it all on the line. Neither one of these guys wanted to just edge out a decision here. They really wanted to go to war in this cage, and they still respected each other after all was said and done. What were your thoughts on this one, Jeff?
Bill, for me, this was fight of the night, man. Tony Ferguson coming out strong, and I thought Anthony Pettis was doing a good job of those leg kicks, because in the first round, Tony Ferguson looked a little uncomfortable with his movement, especially after taking those 2 really hard leg kicks from Pettis. I don't know why he didn't go back to the well with those. And like you said, Ferguson looked like he was getting the better of Pettis in the first round. He was able to find his range rather quickly. And then Anthony Pettis in the second round was looking much smoother, was letting his hands go a little bit more, and landed this right hand that cracked Tony Ferguson, put him right to the mat. And Pettis was doing a pretty good job off the top. And we've talked about how good his ground game is from the bottom, but he was doing a really good job of transitioning and making Ferguson work and pin him down. It's a shame that in between rounds, Pettis told his coach that he broke his right hand, which is his power hand. And I was upset that the fight was stopped in between rounds, but I got to give all the credit in the world to Duke Rufus and his team, because they didn't want to put Pettis in any danger. They didn't want him to get injured any further, and they called the fight for the fighter's safety. So gotta love him for that.
Yeah, it was a good decision, and an admirable one by Duke Rufus, and he didn't even hesitate. He said, "Your hand's broken. I'm not putting you back in there." And that's it. It was done. He waved the fight off. A not so great decision before that was Jason Herzog, the referee, stopping the fight because of the blood over Pettis's eye. It wasn't really getting in his eyes, but Anthony Pettis had Ferguson stunned. He had him hurt on the ground, and Tony Ferguson is a guy who we know has amazing recovery time. So, did this impact the outcome of the fight? I don't want to say yes, and I don't want to say no, but you could tell Pettis was frustrated that Herzog stopped the fight. And then he also gave Tony Ferguson an opportunity to wipe the blood off of his face. I don't think that's how it's supposed to work. If a fighter has a cut right over their eye, I think the doctor is only allowed to clear enough out of their eye so that they can see if the blood is going to impair their vision going forward. I don't think you're supposed to wipe off the fighter's entire face. At least this is the way it's always been before, unless there's been some kind of change to the rule that I'm not aware of. And then, letting the opponent wipe his face as well. It was a very awkward pause in the action by Jason Herzog. And you could tell Anthony Pettis was frustrated because he knows that Tony Ferguson was taking that time to recover. And then, he recovered. It turns out it didn't matter because the action stopped. But, Is there a possibility that Anthony Pettis could have gotten a finish in that time? Yeah. Or he could have, maybe if he had hurt Tony Ferguson a little bit more, it would have been worth it to go out there with that broken hand and try and finish the job. I don't know. But it's just food for thought. And, definitely credit to Duke Rufus for not wanting to put his fighter in unnecessary danger. I don't think Pettis' stock goes down whatsoever after this fight. I think he's back in the conversation at 155, which is a clusterfuck right now. And, we might as well get into that. Tony Ferguson said in a post-fight press conference, he's the champ, but he'll fight anybody. He'll fight Conor. He'll fight Khabib. He thinks that him and Khabib deserve the fifth chance to put this fight together. Any other thoughts on Ferguson and Pettis before we move on, Jeff?
Yeah, man. I think that they should definitely try and attempt that Khabib versus Tony Ferguson fight. The fifth time's a charm. And Bill, I think we need to form a search party to look for Tony Ferguson's mind, man. He has been all over the place in interviews, man. At one point, he was like, "Who's your favorite Ninja Turtle?" "Mine's Michelangelo." I'm like, well, dude, what are you saying? But
yeah.
Aside from Tony Ferguson's mental health, physically, he looked great. So I'm excited to see what's next for him in the lightweight division.
Yeah. You got to wonder about Tony Ferguson, like what's going on in that guy's head, because he says some really awesome things. Like at the open workout, he had this really great motivational speech, and he talked about coming back from his injuries, and the doctors told him he would be out for at least a year, and here he is back in the cage 6 months later, which is a phenomenal physical achievement, and it really speaks to what a freak athlete he is. But yeah, the way he goes off on rants sometimes, where he has what we call in public relations pocket statements, which means you have something in mind that you want to say and a point you want to get across, and you're going to say it no matter what questions you're asked. And it's really a fantastic PR strategy to have that. So somebody could say, "How did the fight go and what do you want next?" And you can take that question and just insert your pocket statement, even if it doesn't answer their question directly. The soundbite is always going to be what your answer is. So Tony Ferguson is pretty good at that. But then when he tells stories, it gets a little weird. Like at the post-fight press conference, he told a story about how he ran into Conor McGregor backstage, and Conor McGregor was doing his strut. And then he saw Tony Ferguson and he stopped in his tracks and he wanted nothing to do with him. It was kind of a weird story, but okay, fine. Fast forward 5 or 6 questions later in the press conference, and he tells the exact same story when he was asked a completely different question. And he told it the exact same way. He's like, "Yeah, I saw Conor backstage, and he was doing his strut, and he turned and looked at me, and then he stopped in his tracks, and he wanted nothing to do with me." And I was like, I know I just heard this story. I know I don't have CTE. But granted, he just came out of one of the best wars we've seen in a long time, and he still considers himself the champ. He was the interim champion 6 months ago, actually less than that, because he was stripped of his interim belts less than 6 months ago, and he hasn't lost. So I guess he has a right to claim that he's a champion. But who knows what's going to happen, especially after the disaster that followed the main event. So let's get into that. And I don't want to take away from the actual fight. Obviously, everybody, all the media outlets are talking about the drama that ensued after the fight was over, and who was right and who was wrong. And I definitely have an opinion on it, Jeff. I know you do too, but our priority here is always going to be the action that takes place inside the octagon. And I really want to take time to break that down first before we get into the drama side, because we always try to veer away from that. I know I always get the point across that, there's no such thing as bad publicity, and down the road, these things can be good for the sport. But there's definitely a negative spin on a lot of this as well. But we like to keep things positive here. So let's look at the main event itself. I thought this was a fantastic fight. Do I think that going into this, it was the biggest fight in UFC history? No. I think the only thing making that true was Joe Rogan saying it and Dana White saying it and anybody else who was responsible for promoting this fight saying it. And, I don't blame them. The UFC's numbers haven't been great, especially in the past year. And with Conor McGregor out and with John Jones having his drug test problems and everything like that, the pay-per-views just haven't been selling. So they needed something to give this a little boost. And I think this fight delivered. I think if you go back and look at it for just the fight, I think we got exactly what we could have hoped for out of it. They felt each other out in the first round. Khabib was able to hit a takedown. Conor stayed calm on the bottom, just like we predicted he would, just like he did against Chad Mendes. He was able to keep his back up against the fence and not expend a lot of energy in that first round. He was able to keep Khabib below his hips, which helped him not take a lot of damage, and he looked fine after that first round. Definitely a first round win for Khabib. The second round, Khabib beat on him a little bit more. I would say that this round would probably be a 10-8 if it went to the judges' scorecard. Khabib was able to get past Conor's hips, and I still think Conor did a good job of surviving. Khabib also landed a big shot that rocked Conor on the feet, which a lot of people didn't see coming. He did a great job of being long with his punches, Khabib. He wasn't throwing a whole lot of them, but when he did, he was able to keep Conor at the end of them. Usually Khabib throws really short punches, and he kind of wings them out a little bit because he just throws them as a distraction to close the distance for a takedown. But that long punch that rocked Conor was really impressive. So beat Conor down, broke him down in the second round. And Dominic Cruz had made a comment saying that maybe Conor is just trying to get Khabib tired here. And I think a lot of people probably laughed that off, including Joe Rogan. Joe Rogan even said, no, he's getting smashed here. But when Conor went back to his corner, he was feeling good. And his corner said, this is exactly what we want. So maybe it was a weird strategy. It's odd to think that you would want Khabib on top of you, punching your brains out for an entire round just to tire him out. But, I was impressed with Conor's grappling in this fight. Like I had said last week, his grappling is very underrated. I think he did a lot better than we've seen other people do with better grappling credentials underneath Khabib. And he came out in that third round, and I believe he won it. He pieced Khabib up a little bit in that round. He landed some really nice strikes. He stuffed a couple of takedowns and started to take some of Khabib's confidence away. And it looked like we had a really interesting fight on our hands. And then, of course, came the fourth round where it seemed like Conor was just taking too many unnecessary shots. He was keeping his hands down like he usually does. And once Khabib realized he could land a little bit, he tagged Conor's face up a little bit, took him to the ground, and then we had to finish a neck crank coming at 3 minutes into the fourth round. And I believe that the neck crank was intentional. I think he could have gotten the choke if he wanted to, but he wanted to make sure that Conor tapped. I think he wanted to make a point of that. So just to clarify what I'm saying, if it's a choke, Conor could just go unconscious and never tap out. And he could say, like, I never tapped out to Khabib. But with a neck crank, it's just painful. It crushes your jaw. It hurts your neck. And the only way out of it is to tap. You're not going to go to sleep from it because it's not cutting off the blood flow to your brain. So I think the neck crank was intentional so Khabib could prove a point by making Conor tap. And I think it was a very fitting way for it to end, given the back and forth they had and Khabib saying that, Conor's a quitter and he's a chicken and he taps out, this and that. So if it had ended there, then it's a perfect storybook ending for Khabib. He gets the redemption for everything and he gets to walk away looking like a hero. Unfortunately, it didn't go down that way. But before we get into that, Jeff, I know I gave some really detailed insight to this fight, but I know you probably saw some things that I didn't. So what were your thoughts on the actual fight itself?
Yeah, Bill, I think that From Habib's side, I think that everything we talked about essentially happened. He went mostly for the takedowns, especially in the first two rounds, basically ignored the stand up. I thought he did a good job of taking a lot of Conor's shots, and he got in his face a little bit. There were times where he put his hands down and was okay with taking shots. And to go back to what you said about the second round, where Dominic Cruz said that Conor was trying to tire Habib out, I thought it made a lot of sense actually, because Habib was landing some big shots, and it looked like Conor was moving his head when he was on the bottom, so it looked like he wasn't taking too much damage because he was kind of rolling with the punches. And Bill, I always go back to this example where when Brock Lesnar fought Shane Carwin for the UFC Heavyweight Championship, and Shane Carwin basically gassed himself out in the first round, doing that exact same thing with that vicious ground and pound. Bill, the only mistake Conor made was that he underestimated Habib's gas tank. I thought Habib was kind of gassed out because when the third round started, he was taking some deep breaths, and I kind of thought Conor would increase the volume of his punches a little bit more. And I thought he did well in the round, but it kind of felt like that third round, both of them kind of took the round off a little bit. I saw a lot less action from Conor. I saw virtually no takedown attempts from Habib in the first 3 minutes of that round. And the fourth round, like you said, I think that Habib wanted to not just put Conor out. I think he wanted to torture him a little bit with that neck crank. And even after Conor had tapped, it took the ref to break Habib's hands apart because Habib didn't let go right away, and then he was in his face, and everybody else kind of knows what happened after that. Which I agree with you, Bill. It was a big debacle. But Bill, let's get into it. Let's if you want, I want to hear your initial thoughts on this.
Yeah, just one more point I wanted to make, and that's the way that both of the guys looked at the beginning of the fight, which I thought was interesting because Khabib looked a lot leaner than
Mm,
he usually does.
yeah.
He not only had abs at the weigh-in, but he was looking pretty ripped when he got in the cage, even after he rehydrated, which says that he took his weight cut very serious this time. I think he was really disciplined, which is awesome to see because that's always been, the one criticism about him is that, he hasn't made weight in the past. And it was a big concern about this fight coming together. Conor, on the other hand, did not look as ripped as he normally did. He looked like he went a lot more carb heavy during his training camp, which tells me that he was doing a lot of grappling. Because when you do a lot of striking training, it just leans you out because it's a different kind of cardio. When you do a lot of grappling, it makes your muscles a little bit more dense. And, grapplers typically are not very ripped. They're more dense, bulkier, slow twitch muscle. And strikers typically are leaner and they have more fast twitch muscle, kind of like an Anderson Silva build, like a Conor McGregor build. If you look at a lot of Muay Thai fighters, they're not like stocky. They're long and lean, but they're strong as fuck. So that was something I noticed right off the bat, that Conor had probably been doing a lot of grappling in his camp because he was looking a little bit thicker and not as ripped. And Khabib was probably doing a lot of striking in his camp. All right, Jeff. So here's the thing. Khabib wins the fight. He should be able to put his belt on, raise his hands, walk out of there, and be in the conversation for the greatest lightweight of all time, pound for pound discussion, greatest fighter of all time, possibly call out GSP in his post-fight speech because that's what he wanted. He didn't have to, show good sportsmanship and shake Conor's hand. That's not a requirement whatsoever. It definitely does show good sportsmanship. So what he did was he screamed in Conor's face. Herb Dean had to kind of pull him back a little bit. And then once he was separated from Conor, he locked eyes with Dylan Dennis, who is Conor McGregor's jiu-jitsu coach, who did Conor no good during this fight, by the way, because there was one point where Khabib had Conor pinned up against the cage, and you could clearly see Dylan Dennis's face sitting behind the cage, and he wasn't saying anything. Now, it's great if you have a Marcelo Garcia black belt in your corner, but it would be even better if they're giving you advice when you're in a grappling exchange, like being pinned up against the cage by a Dagestani mauler like Khabib. So, anyway, that point aside, Khabib locks eyes with Dylan Dennis. I guess they had exchanged words before. He starts yelling at him, and then he jumps over the cage, and he basically Hulk stomps off the cage platform and goes after Dylan Dennis and attacks him. In the meantime, I'm not sure what order things had happened. Conor McGregor punches one of Khabib's coaches who was up on the cage, and then Conor gets off the cage, and another one of Khabib's guys jumps over the cage and punches Conor twice in the back of the head. A couple of other guys tried to get at him and were not successful. It was broken up by security. And they finally get Khabib, I guess, somewhat settled down and back in the cage, and Conor leaves, which, even in a loss, you're going to want a soundbite from Conor at the end of this thing, just to try and sell a rematch to use for promotion down the line. They didn't get that. Conor left, and then Dana White came in the cage, and he decided he's not going to put the belt on Khabib because he thinks the crowd is going to go crazy after seeing Khabib's actions, which is a reasonable thought. I can't imagine being in a position where I have to make that decision. And there's, however many million people watching, and you're going to make a lot of enemies by not putting the belt on the guy. But at the same time, he wanted to make sure the crowd was safe. And from the result, it looked like it was the right decision because they were able to get Khabib out safely. My thought on this, and there's a lot of different ways you could look at it. There is no reason ever to put your hands on somebody that you're not in a sanctioned fight with, and that should never be a thought that even crosses your mind as a martial artist. I thought it was a really disgusting display. There's no reason to go and attack basically bystanders. Granted, Dylan Dennis is a quote unquote fighter himself, but that night he was a corner man, and there's no reason to do that. Now, obviously Khabib is loved in the MMA community, so a lot of people are quick to defend him, and that's fine. But this is not defensible behavior. This is not something that you should be doing at all. Get up, walk away, put your hands up, put your belt on, and cut a promo and call out whoever you want for your next fight and move on with your life. I know a lot of inflammatory things were said in the build-up for this fight, and the line was probably crossed a few times. And Conor McGregor's done a lot of dumb shit himself, and I wouldn't excuse any of that. It's not right that Conor McGregor threw a dolly at the bus, and it's not right that Conor McGregor throws water bottles at Nate Diaz, and it's not right that Conor McGregor jumped over the cage and tried to attack Jose Aldo a couple of years ago. I don't think these things are, mutually exclusive. I think you can condemn both of these guys and also be a fan of both of these guys, because that's where I'm at. I love both of these fighters as martial artists and what they're able to do in the cage, but I find both of their behavior outside of the cage to be disgusting. Khabib has been known for this before. He's gotten into a fight with Nate Diaz at a Bellator event. He put his hands on Artem Lobov backstage at another UFC event, and now he's attacking cornermen. He shouldn't be doing this. And the one thing I definitely don't want to hear is that Conor McGregor said too many bad things, like, oh, he was talking about his religion, he was talking about his father. That's not an acceptable reason to attack a guy's corner man. It's just words. You're grown men. You get to get in the cage and fight and settle it, which you don't get to do anywhere else. Anywhere else, you have to just deal with it. If you're at a job or something and somebody says something you don't like and they don't get fired for it or something, you just have to suck it up and deal with it. At least you get to go in there and take Conor McGregor down and punch him in the face. So the things that Conor says is definitely no excuse for his behavior. And the fact that Conor has done stupid things in the past is no excuse for his behavior. Khabib should not be jumping out of the cage to attack people that he's not sanctioned to fight with, period. And, that's my thought on it. There's a whole other angle you could go with it where, everybody's talking about this. It went ballistic on social media, and it's going to get a lot more eyes on the UFC, which I normally say is a good thing, but shit's starting to get a little bit too carried away. And I'm talking about both Conor and Khabib when I say that. I'm not a fan of the out of the cage antics, which is why we usually don't talk about it on this show. We don't talk about Conor unless he's got a fight coming up, and we try to stick to breaking down the fight. So that was a whole long explanation of what happened and my thoughts on it, Jeff. I know you have your own opinions, and I'm sure we're probably pretty aligned on most things. So why don't you give me your reaction to the chaos that went down after the main event of UFC 229 here in Vegas?
Yeah, Bill. So you did a good job of covering a lot of it pretty well. So I'm just gonna kind of give you my 2 cents and my thoughts. Is honestly, Bill, it's unacceptable. It's unprofessional. Conor, was he okay? People are saying Conor started by throwing the dolly at the bus and he hurt a bunch of fighters. Yeah, that's unacceptable as well. But he's had his day in court. He's been held accountable for that by laws, and that's what we have laws for, is to make sure that shit like this doesn't happen. And like you said, Bill, this is the only job in the world where if you have a problem with someone, you can kick the shit out of them, and no one's gonna sue you. No one's gonna take any legal action against you for doing that. So to see Khabib have all this happen after the fact is totally unacceptable. He should have just gotten up, and two wrongs don't make a right. What Conor has done is wrong too. I think he crossed a few lines, but I agree with you, Bill. They're just words. Words never hurt anybody, and if you think that words can hurt you, grow up. All right, simple as that. But dude, like I said, it's just unacceptable. It left a sour taste in my mouth, especially after the performance that he put on. I mean, I thought he looked almost flawless in there. I thought there was no need for this afterwards.
Yeah, yeah, it was definitely a really shitty ending to a really awesome performance by Khabib, because he really could have cemented his legacy here. 27-0. He beat a guy who's on a lot of people's pound for pound all-time greats list, 2-division champion. And it really ruined it. Now, I'm going to emphasize again, I don't like the argument that Conor's done a lot of dumb shit in the past too, because, Conor, he walks the line by playing this character that he does in the media. And a lot of people still don't realize that that's what it is. It's a character. He's selling the fights. It's part of the marketing, and he's kind of trapped playing this character. He has to be on at all times. Every time he gets in front of a microphone, he has to be that guy that he has established himself at. He has to say inflammatory things. He has to do crazy things, and he has to try and push that line and go right up to it and not go over it. But he has gone over it in the past. Now, jumping over the cage to get in Jose Aldo's face, I don't think crossed the line. I think that was actually great marketing to build up the Jose Aldo fight. Jumping over the Bellator cage and putting his hands on an official in Ireland, that was crossing the line. He definitely shouldn't have done that, and he probably should have gotten a bigger punishment for doing that. Throwing water bottles at Nate Diaz, that's pretty good promotion for the fight. It's childish, but I don't think it's crossing the line. Throwing a dolly at a bus, that's fucking stupid. He shouldn't have done that. You know, he could have gone in there and made a scene without hurting anybody or putting people at risk. But I think when you're put in that position, and I'm not trying to defend Conor's behavior whatsoever, but when you're put in that position where you always have to be outdoing yourself because that's the reputation that he's established for himself. When you put yourself in that situation, you know, you're going to end up going over that line sometimes. And then when he's getting in Khabib's head, I can definitely understand why Khabib got more upset than most fighters, because he's so stoic and so, you know, he seems to be so emotionless that, like, to push him to the point where he is mad, it's probably to the point of no return. You know, he comes from a very different culture where they're not ball breakers over there. They don't tease each other. They're very literal people. You know, if you tell somebody something that's shitty about themselves, they take it literal every time. It's not promoting a fight. It's not playing a game. It's not mental warfare. It's, okay, you say that about me, I want to fucking kill you. And that's the mentality that Khabib has. And unfortunately, it's not the mentality that is conducive to good sportsmanship. Now, I don't know what's going to happen. I do know that the guys who put their hands on Conor in the cage after the fight were arrested and detained, but Conor McGregor did not want to press charges, so they were released. Now, that may be because, you know, he really doesn't care and he was really upset about the loss of the fight to Khabib, because that's what he told Dana White. It may be because he also put his hands on a coach, which was, you know, that came out in some of the later footage that was released, some of the cell phone footage that's been going around the internet that show that Conor may have thrown the first punch, but you know, that still doesn't excuse what Khabib did. Now, the Nevada State Athletic Commission is going to be the one to determine what happens with Khabib going forward. So they withheld both of their purses. I guess, you know, the money is released to the fighters after the fight is done. You know, you fulfill your duties that are written in your contract, and then you get paid. The money is released to your account. So they withheld both of them. They went back and looked at the tapes. Now, these are just the tapes that the UFC had. This is not the cell phone footage that was released later. And they decided that Conor didn't do anything wrong, so they released his money. They withheld Khabib's because if they end up finding him, they're just going to take the money, I guess, right out of his purse. Now, there's a lot of other things that can happen here, and it could end up being very serious for Khabib. If the Nevada State Athletic Commission decides to suspend him or revoke his license to fight for attacking someone who's not a fighter, this could be a big problem for him and his ability to stay in the country. Because if you're in this country on a work visa and your job is being a professional fighter and your license to fight is suspended, guess what happens to your work visa? It goes out the window. And we already know Khabib's father has had problems getting a visa to come into this country just to corner Khabib in his fights. You know, he hasn't been able to come to his last couple of fights because he's stuck in Dagestan, because, you know, the work visa situation is not so great right now. And we won't get too deep into politics here, I promise you, but I'm just kind of giving the worst case scenario here. So if that were to happen and he's suspended for a long time and his license gets revoked, now what happens when that goes down? And the same thing happened to Mike Tyson when he bit Evander Holyfield. You know, for those old enough to remember this happening, he had his license revoked, and what happens is you can reapply for your fight license 1 year later. But when you don't have a work visa to be in the country, it makes it a much stickier situation. So it really depends on, you know, how harsh the Nevada State Athletic Commission wants to be. You know, we've seen them be very harsh on some people, like Nick Diaz, for just smoking weed and getting a 5-year suspension. And we've seen them be more lenient, like recently with John Jones, where, you know, there was the snitch clause and whatever else went down, and he only got a 15-month suspension when he could have gotten 4 years or whatever the worst case was. So this could be a really shitty situation for Khabib. Here you are, 27-0. You should be on the biggest high of your life right now because you just beat the crap out of the guy who's been talking shit about your whole country and your family and your religion and everything else. And you could have called out GSP and then rode off into the sunset and never have to deal with Conor McGregor again. Now you're going to possibly be regretting your actions after beating up Conor McGregor for the rest of your life, because this could really affect Khabib's career. You know, I know he was talking about retiring and everything after this fight. You know, there were rumors of that from his teammates and stuff, but this could be a really fucked up situation for Khabib, and that would be unfortunate to see. So, Jeff, did I put anything in your head that you hadn't thought about? Any new perspective here? And do you want to add anything to everything I just said?
No, you're absolutely right, Bill, on all accounts. And speaking of holding up his purse, Bill, I was looking at the fighter payouts, and Habib should have gotten a cool $2 million, which would take care of him. He could live comfortable off that. And now he messed it all up, man. All that money is in jeopardy. I doubt that another fight, unless it's with like GSP, would get him this amount of money. I don't think he's gotten this amount of money maybe in all of his previous fights put together, you know? So, you know, he fucked up. It's that simple. And but Bill, let's move away from this a little bit, because we were speaking about how harsh his punishments were. But Bill, something that is not harsh, that I really did not want to like, Bill, because I'm not a big fan of Conor McGregor. I like seeing him fight, but I really didn't want to like this. Was I was able to pick up a bottle of Proper 12, and Bill, it's good stuff. It is like Jameson Light is what I want to say. It doesn't have such a big kick at the end where it feels like you're going to get a little bit of heartburn. It's so smooth going down. It's got a nice caramel color. Bill, I love this stuff. I'm a little scared now because I might have one of the few bottles remaining. So when I bought it, the dude who sold it to me told me that a lot of stores in New Jersey had gotten limited supply because it was a promotional thing. So they only got 1 or 2 cases. So I was lucky to get a bottle. He was running low on supply, actually. So, Bill, after the results of all this and Conor losing, I mean, I don't know if that's going to put a hurt on Proper 12 getting off the ground here.
No, I don't think so. I think regardless of the outcome of this fight, Conor McGregor doesn't lose his like star and celebrity status. I see him bouncing back from this. He's already calling for a rematch with Khabib. And if that happens, it may have to happen overseas, and it may happen in Dublin. Who knows? That's kind of my prediction. I'm thinking like maybe February timeframe. If they do the rematch, it'll happen there. I don't know if the UFC is going to want to try and do Khabib and Tony Ferguson. That's what I would like to see personally. You know, you and I were looking so forward to that fight the last 4 times they tried to put it together. But I'm glad you enjoyed the Proper 12, and I don't see it as an endorsement of Conor McGregor. I see it as an endorsement of liking whiskey. And personally, Jeff, last night while I was watching this Russian wrestler maul this Irish striker in the United States, I was drinking some Japanese whiskey just to make it a fully global and multicultural event. So the one of the many perks of being a podcast host about mixed martial arts and alcohol, as we have on our hands here, Jeff, is that when you invite people to your house to watch the fights on Saturday night, you know, they want to impress you and bring over good booze. So my buddy Jeff came over and he brought a bottle of this Hibiki Suntory whiskey, which is Japanese whiskey. Now, a lot of Japanese whiskeys are basically scotches, but they can't technically be called scotches because they're not from Scotland. They're from Japan. But, you know, they have that very peaty, slightly smoky kind of flavor to it. The Hibiki is very light. If you're watching on YouTube right now, I'm holding it up. You can see it kind of looks like even like an Irish whiskey,
Yeah.
because it's not aged. It's not aged very long, but just the distillation process is so thorough with the Japanese because they're so disciplined in everything they do that they want to make sure that they do something right if they're going to invest their time in something, which is why Japanese whiskey is so amazing. It's hard to come by here in the States because they don't export a lot of it. So I don't know if it'll be as hard to come by as Proper 12 in the in the coming months, but it's definitely hard to get your hands on it. But it is excellent stuff, very smooth. I'm drinking this just neat right now, no water, no ice, and it's really helping soothe my throat, which is very aggravated from having to talk about all this bullshit drama that I that I hate so much. You know how much I hate to harp on the negative, Jeff. So we talked about some good booze. Let's talk about some good fights, and let's end this show on an upswing here. So Dominic Reyes getting a huge win in the UFC over Ovince St. Preux, who is a top-ranked prospect in this very, very thin light heavyweight division. So he gets a unanimous decision victory on paper. A lot of people thought it should have been a knockout. Ovince St. Preux hitting the canvas with just a couple of seconds left and Dominic Reyes walking off. Dan Miragliotta said, "You have to get up." And just as he said the word up, the horn went off to end the round. Joe Rogan thought it should have been a knockout. Dominic Reyes thought it should have been a knockout. I thought it should have been a knockout initially, and then when they replayed it, I didn't hear the horn at first, but when they replayed it and he said, "You got to get up," and it was like burn right when he said the word up, I was like, all right, I guess I should go to the judges' scorecard. Now, what would have been really fucked up for Dominic Reyes would be if he lost the decision after basically putting Ovince St. Preux to sleep at the end of the fight. I thought it was a good, solid performance by Dominic Reyes. A lot of straight punches. He was able to control distance really well against a very unorthodox striker in Ovince St. Preux. What were your thoughts on the ending of this one, Jeff, and the overall performance by Dominic Reyes here?
Yeah, dude, the ending was pretty wild. But Bill, overall, Dominic Reyes just dominated this fight, man. I honestly had OSP winning this one by submission for obvious reasons. But dude, Dominic Reyes looked great in there. He looked great on the feet. I didn't see too much of the groundwork, unfortunately. But Reyes just looked dominant, man. He looked like he had no problems whatsoever with OSP. And this is a guy who's fought John Jones and taken him to a decision. Bill, I think Dominic Reyes may have breathed some new life into this light heavyweight division last night.
Yeah, for sure. It'd be interesting to see what's next for him. If I were him, I would think about calling out the winner of next week's main event, which would be Volkan Ozdemir and Anthony Smith. Since things are kind of murky at the top of that division right now, I think any of those would be a good matchup. Although I kind of would like to see Dominic Reyes with a lower top 10 opponent, but with the state of the light heavyweight division right now, I wouldn't know what recommendation to make as far as that goes, because not looking so good. And you know what else wasn't looking so good? Derek Lewis for probably the first, I guess, 14 minutes and 40 seconds of his fight with Alexander Volkov. I know he was uncomfortable. I know his balls was hot in there, but man, it was uncomfortable to watch because Derek Lewis, he's interesting to watch fight because it looks like he doesn't even want to be in there. And it looks like he's just kind of quitting. And then out of nowhere, he just explodes. It's like he plays possum a little bit, or it's more like he plays hippopotamus. You know how like a hippopotamus just like sits in the water and just kind of looks around and like flips its ears and like, sprays its shit with its tail. And you think it's like this big, cute, cuddly animal, and they make all these fun board games out of them, and they make cute cartoons out of them. And a fucking hippopotamus will rip you in half, Jeff. They kill more people every year than great white sharks. You don't want to fuck with a hippopotamus. So that's my assessment of Derek Lewis's fight style. He's playing hippopotamus, Jeff. He wants you to think he's like this big, cute, cuddly, funny dude, and then all of a sudden he's ripping you in half. Credit to Alexander Volkov. I thought he fought a great fight. He was picking Derek Lewis apart the entire time. He was picking his shots. He stayed patient even when he had him rocked because he knew that Lewis was dangerous. And he got off his game plan for a split second at 4 minutes, 49 seconds of the third round. And Derek Lewis let him know that he was bringing that hot ball fire right to Volkov's face. And that's what he did, putting him down with a big right hand at the end of the fight and giving one of the best post-fight interview speeches of all time. What were your thoughts on the performance of the Black Beast, Jeff?
Bill, I couldn't tell you what exactly happened because it looked like things were just peachy for Alexander Volkov. He's doing the right things. He's using that jab effectively. He's keeping Derek Lewis at bay with his long arms and long reach because Alexander Volkov's like 27 feet tall. And Bill, Derek Lewis, there's like 15 seconds left in the fight, and Derek Lewis hits a 1-2, which is a jab cross. Alexander Volkov falls to the floor, and Derek Lewis lands 3 or 4 more punches, and next thing I know, the ref's waving off the fight. I was like, wait, no, stop, what? So, Bill, I must have gone through like 3 different emotions before I realized that Derek Lewis had actually won this fight. But, dude, you got to give it to him, man. He somehow pulled it off, and, along with his pants. So, Bill, I don't know what the game plan was. I got nothing for you, Bill. He won.
Yeah. Yeah. So Joe Rogan asked Derek Lewis if he wanted a title shot, and he said, "Oh, my cardio is not like that." He's like, "But I'll come on your podcast and smoke some weed." So of course Derek Lewis is welcome on this podcast anytime. We'll have some beers and some ribs and whatever else. Shit, I might even smoke some weed to talk to Derek Lewis. It'd be a fun interview. So Derek, if you're listening, let's get in touch here. Before you get on Rogan, let's blow you up a little first here. So sad story for Alexander Volkov because he, with the blink of an eye, he lets a surefire victory slip through his hands. And it's sad because this is a guy who nobody really knows. He was a monster over in Bellator. He comes over to the UFC riding a 6-fight win streak going into this fight with Derek Lewis and dominated him for the better part of 3 rounds. And with 11 seconds left, gets finished with a nasty knockout. And, 6 wins in a row is not easy to do as a heavyweight, Jeff, because, any heavyweight you get in there can potentially end the fight with 1 punch. And that's what we saw from Derek Lewis. And Volkov is one of these guys who, probably would be in the title contention picture if he were, a little bit more of a character and stood out a little bit more. If he had the personality of Derek Lewis and his record, he would probably be a champion right now. He was coming off a knockout of former champion Fabricio Verdum. He knocked out Stefan Struve. He has a win over Roy Nelson. And, just an awesome streak. You look at this guy's record. He's got wins over Rico Rodriguez, Brett Rogers, and, on and on. He's got a lot of experience, 37 fights total. He's a monster, 6'7". This is a guy who should be at the top of the heavyweight division, but unfortunately, I think this sets him back a lot because everybody's just going to remember how the fight ended. Nobody's going to remember that he was dominating Derek Lewis, and that's unfortunate for Alexander Volkov, but awesome if you're Derek Lewis. Any other thoughts on this one, Jeff?
Yeah. I thought Derek Lewis definitely earned some redemption after his last fight with what's his name, Ngannou. But Bill, let's move on because this was one of my favorite fights on the card. Was Michelle Waterson versus Felice Herrig. I thought that Herrig started off okay, and then it was all Michelle Waterson. This was a really fun fight, Bill.
Yeah, this was a good one. And I was a little concerned for Michelle Waterson because you could really tell the size difference in there. Felice Herring looked a lot bigger than her. And Michelle Waterson really should be, a 105-pounder. That's what she was in Invicta. But unfortunately, the UFC doesn't have that weight division. I don't think they'll be making it anytime soon because they've made it very clear that they don't want to add any more weight classes right now. I thought it was a great performance by Michelle Waterson. Felice Herrig is tough. She's had a lot of impressive victories and she's come really close to breaking into that top 5, but every time she gets close she kind of gets knocked down a few pegs. And Michelle Waterson is just one of these personalities that the UFC really gets behind. So I don't know what's next for her because she kind of rattled through who's available at the top of the strawweight division, and it doesn't really seem like anything will align for her right now, but hopefully we see her get back in there soon.
Yeah, I agree with you, Bill. Um, the strawweight division at the top is a little bottlenecked at the moment, so I think Michelle Waterson's just gonna have to hang out and make some more videos of her dancing on Twitter, which I'm not totally opposed to. So, Bill, going back to these prelims, I think we can skip over the flyweight bout, Bill. I know I was trying to get you excited for this one, but I think that
Dud.
the only Pettis that matters we already discussed. So let's get into this welterweight bout, Bill. Vicente Luque took a fight against late replacement Jalen Turner, who was on Dana White's Tuesday Night Contender Series. And Bill, it was not a good night for Turner. I think he was basically a lamb led to slaughter here because Vicente Luque annihilated him in less than 4 minutes and got a really, really nice KO win for him to extend his win streak.
Yeah, Vicente Luque is one of these guys, much like Volkov, who has been really consistent. His only loss in the last couple of years since coming up on the Ultimate Fighter season, where it was American Top Team versus the Black Zillions, his only loss was to Leon Edwards, who's considered to be at the top of the division right now. He had a loss to Michael Graves in the finale of that season of the Ultimate Fighter, which was season 21, I believe, if memory serves correct. And then he's had a string of finishes ever since then, and he's looked awesome. He's got a knockout win over Bilal Muhammad. He submitted Nico Price. He knocked out Chad Laprise in 4 minutes in his last fight. And here comes Jalen Turner, who's a highly touted prospect from the Contender Series. He looked awesome on there. He got in here. He looked a little bit stiff. His striking looked a little awkward, a little bit tentative, and Vicente Luque had lightning fast counter striking. Every time Jalen Turner threw something, before the punch even landed, something was coming back at his face. And I think he just couldn't get used to that pace. He was not able to get in his rhythm. He looked very uncomfortable towards the end of the fight. And then Vicente Luque, once he found his range, he landed that hard shot. And Jalen Turner tried to do some kind of spinning move, and there was a hook waiting for him on the other end of it, and it wasn't pretty. It was a violent knockout. He hit the canvas hard, and he did not move for a while. So hopefully Jalen Turner is doing okay today. I want to just kind of breeze over the rest of this card, Jeff, because just for the sake of time, but there was a lot of action on these prelims. So Aspen Ladd remains undefeated with a TKO in the first round over Tanya Evinger, which is nothing to shake a stick at. I'm not really sure what that phrase means, but it sounded right. Scott Holtzman with a nasty elbow KO over Alan Patrick Silva Alves, and Yana Kuniskaya getting the decision over Lena Landsberg. And we talked about the rest of the fights. So out of the three I just mentioned, Jeff, any last words on UFC 229 as far as those fights are concerned on the prelims?
Yeah, just go back and check out Aspen Ladd versus Tanya Evinger if you get a chance. Because Aspen Ladd, I didn't know too much about her heading into this, just that she's undefeated. And Tanya Evinger has fought Chris Cyborg before. She's done really well in Invicta. And Aspen Ladd just came in there and dominated her. Looked good everywhere. Got the fight to the ground and had vicious ground and pound. Was yelling out like a barbarian as she was raining down these shots on Tanya Evinger and got the win in the first round. So good for her. I want to see her again. She was vicious in there.
Yeah, for sure. It was a very impressive performance. So Aspen Ladd definitely will be fighting on a main card, I would imagine, after a victory over a name like Tanya Evinger, who, it is an awesomely tough fighter. Got in there with Cyborg, and Cyborg couldn't put her away as fast as Aspen Ladd did. So that's saying a lot, especially because Tanya Evinger went up in weight to face her. So I think we'll put a nail in the coffin here on UFC 229, and we'll move on to talking about next week. A lot of awesome fights, and I don't want that to get lost in the drama that happened at the end of it. As a fan of this sport, as a fight fan, I love Khabib and Conor probably equally. I was looking forward to exactly what happened in the cage, but as a martial artist, I was disgusted by I'm consistently disgusted by their behavior outside of the cage. That goes for Khabib and Conor both. I don't care for the way they act. And I hope something changes. I know the UFC kind of enables it a little bit using the dolly footage and the promos and everything, but I think they tried to put a damper on it by not having a crowd at the first press conference. I don't know if that was an attempt to kind of calm things down a little bit. I don't know what the solution here is, which is why I also don't want to spend too much time on it. Just because I don't like to stay in the negative. So let's look forward to what I'm sure will be a drama-free main event. And I'm talking about UFC Fight Night 138, which is going to be in New Brunswick, not New Jersey, Jeff, New Brunswick, Canada. So if you thought you were getting tickets to this one, you're going to need a passport. So the main event here, two true martial artists, Volkan Ozdemir and Anthony Smith. This is going to be an awesome main event. I didn't care for the promo they showed for it last night. I don't think it got anybody excited for it, but as a real MMA fan, I am really looking forward to this fight. I think it's going to be awesome. These are two guys who like to stand and strike. They both have explosive knockout power. Volkan Ozdemir, for those of you who don't know, for when Anthony Johnson was on his tear in the UFC and knocking out everybody, Ozdemir was his main sparring partner, and he was giving Anthony Johnson hell in the gym from, as legend has it. And Anthony Smith, since he's moved up to light heavyweight, he's just been on the Legend Killer tour, knocking out Rashad Evans, knocking out Shogun Hua, and just looking like an absolute warrior in there doing it. So what are your thoughts on this main event here, Jeff?
Yeah, Bill, I think this one's going to be explosive. I think that this one doesn't go past the second round. So I'm really excited for both of these guys. Both are finishers. Ozdemir, his nickname is No Time, which, I don't know, man. I think that there's going to be fireworks in this one. Someone's going to sleep, man. But Bill, I don't know if this one is next weekend. I think this card looks like October 27th.
Yeah, you're right. I think I was just looking so forward to move on from UFC 229. Yeah, so all right. I guess we have plenty of time to break this one down in the future. We'll be definitely doing an episode next week. And after that, I'm going to be on vacation, heading down to Cuba, Jeff, try and bring you back some cigars.
Bill, you know me.
I'm going to see if I get I'm going to see if I can get in the wrestling room with Yoel Romero.
Yeah, that should be pretty easy. One of my good friends is Cuban, and there's a lot of places to grapple out there. That's like the main thing. Grappling and baseball, I believe, are like the main sports out there in Cuba.
Yeah, for sure. I'm looking forward to it. So I guess we'll have plenty of time to break down this fight card before it happens. Let's see. We'll check out what else we have on the horizon here, so we can end on a more positive note. See what we got coming up in the near future. We have October 12th, Matt Mitrione and Ryan Bader going at it in the next round of Bellator's heavyweight tournament. The winner of that is going to face the winner of Chael Sonnen and Fedor Emelianenko, and that is on October 13th. So we have that going on next weekend, which I didn't even know was happening. So now I'm excited for some Bellator action. Ryan Bader and Matt Mitrione should be a very interesting fight. And then the co-main event of that card is going to be Roy Nelson and Sergey Karatanov. That should be fun. Don't see anything else on this card. Lorenz Larkin is fighting on that card. That should be part of the welterweight tournament. He's fighting Ion Pascos. That should be a fun fight. So that's October 12th. So that's Friday, I believe, and that's going to be in Connecticut at the Mohegan Sun. And then Bellator 208 is the very next day in Uniondale, New York. And that's Fedor against Chael. And then the co-main event, Ben Henderson against Sada Wad. That's a fucking awesome fight. That's really exciting. I'm really happy to hear that that's next weekend now too. That should be awesome. So any thoughts on Bellator 207 and 208 on back-to-back nights here, Jeff?
Yeah, Bill, I'm excited. I think they picked a really good weekend to do it because the UFC is taking a weekend off. I'm excited to see how this heavyweight tournament turns out. Matt Mitrione and Ryan Bader, really good finishers, both really, really talented on the feet. I'm curious to see if Ryan Bader is going to counter Matt Mitrione with some wrestling because we've seen Mitrione struggle a little bit against grapplers. And I'm really excited for Fedor versus Chael Sonnen here because just the weight discrepancy is going to be massive. So I'm curious to see how Chael deals with that. Benson Henderson versus Sada Wad. Like you said, I think that fight's going to be fireworks, dude. I think that might be a fight to light a fire under Benson Henderson's ass here, which I think he's needed. I think he's plateaued a little bit ever since he came over to Bellator. But yeah, Bill, Congo's on this card as well. Alexander Shlemenko, who I thought was retired. But yeah,
he's in the Gray Maynard Club.
Yeah. Yeah. Bill, so before we close out here, I got one last question for you. Do we have a main event for UFC 230 yet? Do you remember what that was?
Yes. It is Valentina Shevchenko against Sijara Eubanks for the UFC Flyweight Championship. Boom.
Man.
Come on, Jeff. I didn't sell you on it with my broadcaster voice.
Bill, I wanted to buy tickets to this one because it's going to be at MSG again.
Maybe they'll be cheaper.
I guess, but I also don't want to. I don't want to watch Sijara Eubanks not make weight and then fight Valentina Shevchenko, Bill.
That would be so unfortunate for Valentina if that happened to her twice in a row. Yeah, Sijara Eubanks. So the reason she wasn't able to fight for the title initially, and the reason Nico Montano got the opportunity she did to win the belt is that she didn't make weight and wasn't allowed to fight. So hopefully she does. I have to say it's unusual that they're going to headline Madison Square Garden. With a women's title that was just vacated, and they're giving a title shot to someone who couldn't get a title shot in their last fight because they couldn't make weight, and has 5 professional fights. But these women are both warriors. I think this could be a really positive thing, because if they go out there and they put on a great performance, headlining Madison Square Garden, this could be something really phenomenal for women's MMA. So let's try and take a positive look at it, and let's congratulate these 2 women for an awesome opportunity that they're going to be getting. There were a lot of fighters who said no to taking this headlining spot, and I can't imagine why. I mean, headlining Madison Square Garden, aside from how shitty the New York State Athletic Commission has been lately, if you're a professional fighter, this has to be on your bucket list. The most famous arena in the world. So Valentina Shevchenko and Sijara Eubanks are going to be able to headline it. We've had some awesome fights headline Madison Square Garden, including Conor McGregor and Eddie Alvarez. And if you get tickets for this, Jeff, you're going to get to see Nate Diaz and Dustin Poirier go at it in the co-main event. I think that's worth it alone. So I'd be checking out the cheap prices on StubHub if I were you. It sounds like an awesome opportunity to go to a live fight and, maybe witness some history here. Maybe we're going to see an awesome war between Valentina Shevchenko and Sijara Eubanks. I can guarantee they're not going to be jumping over the cage to attack any coaches afterwards. So there's that. So let's hope for the best on this one, and congratulate these ladies on an awesome opportunity for them and for women's MMA in general, because it's my show, Jeff, and I want to end it on a positive note. That's why.
Speaking of, Bill, I'm looking at this card, and without getting too far into it, I actually don't care for the main event that much. The rest of the card looks amazing up and down, and we'll get into this more when the time comes. But Bill, I think I might have to buy a ticket for this one.
Yeah, I think you should. And live tweet it there. And you can follow Jeff's live tweets from UFC 230 at Madison Square Garden next month at @animal_Wilson on Twitter. And if you guys want to get a hold of me, it's at MMA on the Rocks on all your favorite social media platforms. That's all we got for this week. My balls was hot. Cheers, everybody. Goodbye.
Nice.